Your sensors are correct. Do not adjust your heading. You've discovered the Omega Particle, streaming to the Alpha Quadrant and beyond. Here's your host, the anchorman of the Federation, the Doctor of Dilithium. This is Jonathan Wiegand.
Welcome back to the Omega Particle Podcast. I am your estranged host, Jonathan Wiegand, with half my brain tied behind my back just to make it fair. I can say estranged because it's been about a month since we put out any episodes or any content. And the real reason, just to be brutally blunt with everybody, is I needed a break. I just needed a break. That was all. The podcast is still going well. We're still going to keep doing it. I just need a little siesta. It's been a lot just with work and with home renovations and with vacations, all happening so much within 4 weeks, plus T-ball for my son. It just was a nut. So I was like, I just don't have time to give podcast 100%. So let's take a step back, reassess, write some good scripts, and kind of develop a little bit of the future of what we want to do for the podcast. And I'm happy to announce that we are going to be doing a more video format coming this fall. So watch us out on YouTube or wherever. Of course, we're still going to be doing the podcast so across all the Alpha Quadrant, but you'll be finally able to see my beautiful face and my terrific recording bunker on the Eastern Coast. I'm really excited about that. The team is really excited about that. So please be on the lookout. Speaking of coming back into Star Trek, there's been a lot that have come out. So for example, I know about a month ago, we talked about doing a Prodigy review if it got popular versus, DS9. And according to the Instagram polls, it was 88% more DS9 reviews than Prodigy. And then Prodigy decided, we're like, hey, we don't know when it's going to come out. It could be sometime next year. Decided to release it July 1st on Netflix. I was like, well, F that. Not doing any more Prodigy reviews, so I'll put that. But now that we got a little of the house cleaning out of the way, let's get into today's episode. And that is what I've so aptly named From the Holodeck to Hollywood. These are cameos that cross many nerd boundaries. We have Lord of the Rings represented today. We even have Parks and Rec represented today. We have Rage Against the Machine, plus some really interesting stories about a cameo that never happened, but still supplied a memorable cameo that may not too many people know about. Without further ado, let's get into the next top 5 cameos in Star Trek. And Luna, let's roll that beautiful bean footage. So our first cameo is kind of a quasi-cameo because they originally wanted and wrote the part for somebody completely different, but it just never worked out. So in 1991, when TNG was in its 5th season, the show writers wanted to include the late, the great Robin Williams. So Williams was always a very outspoken Trekkie, and which was a surprise to me. I didn't know that without first doing the research for this episode. And he even made a reference in his famous Mork and Mindy show about killing off Spock. And the Trek writers were very big Robin Williams fans too. This is 1991. Williams is peak right now. For those of you not alive at the time, so Robin Williams, if you don't know, is just very fast-talking, kind of maniac comedian who wouldn't really fit into the traditional TNG flow because TNG is very composed, almost mature at times. So the writers would have to create an entirely new role for him, not just a Starfleet officer. I couldn't imagine seeing 1999 Robin Williams being a Starfleet officer. So the writers decided to invent a new character for him entirely, who was named Berlinghoff Rasmussen. And for those Trekkies out there, that definitely pinged an ear, because that comes from an episode called A Matter of Time. And in it, a time machine would appear near the Enterprise containing a time-traveling historian from a very distant future. The whole synopsis of the episode is he traveled to the past in order to study the Enterprise, performing this historical task, which kind of seemed very odd to the crew as a dangerous rescue mission because it just seemed standard practice for them. We're just rescuing these people off this planet. Why is this a big deal? But Rasmussen refused to give any advice on the matter, and he didn't want to taint the own timeline and risk erasure from his existence, etc. But him being there is already contaminating the timelines. I always thought that was silly and points that he's a red herring, that he doesn't know what he's doing or what he's talking about. But as like I said, rightfully so, Picard and company are very suspicious of Rasmussen for that exact reason. He was this car salesman type, which would have been perfect for Robin Williams. He would have excelled in this role. The twist, of course, in the plot is that Rasmussen, shocker, is not a time traveler, but actually this New Jersey kind of guy from the past that just acquired and stole this time traveling machine. And he's going ahead in time to steal technologies, phasers, tricorders, communicators. He even tries to steal data at one point and take it to the past, claims he invented it, get money, wealth, fortune, whatever. So he's a con man, and he ends up actually being stranded in the 24th century prison. So it's hilarious, and that would have, again, been perfect for Robin Williams. And if you actually watch this episode with that knowledge, you're like, oh, this was perfect for him, because the guy, who we'll get to in a minute, who actually took on this role, does a very good job, very memorable, but it's not what it could have been. What could have been if we got the late, great Robin Williams onto the bridge of the Enterprise. However, the reason why Robin Williams could not actually be on Star Trek, especially in this role that was designed for him from the beginning, was sadly because the nature of TV production, how concentrated it is, there wasn't a lot of room to accommodate for his schedule. And when the show went into production in late 1991, Williams was busy on the set of a particular little movie called Hook, playing an adult version of Peter Pan. And this production on Hook was still wrapping up when Star Trek would need Williams, and he sadly couldn't make it. And if you don't like Hook, well, now you found another reason not to like it. I personally love it. I grew up on that movie. It's great. If you haven't seen it, please check it out. A lot of other great cameos in that movie, but I'm not going down that rabbit hole. So with Robin Williams declining, we now have a new role, Who Dis? Because somebody needs to step in the shoes, and Paramount chose an actor named Matt Frewer. And he's best known for playing a character on this cult phenomenon show called Max Headroom, and then acting on a CBS sitcom called Dr. Doctor. I have not seen either because I do not watch network TV from the early 90s. Also, he has a very great filmography as well. I just don't want to get into it here for the sake of time and for the sake of relevance, but he still did a very good job. He still stood apart from the usual formality of the show and did a great job as the sleazy car salesman from New Jersey. It would have been an absolute hoot to see Williams on the bridge of the Enterprise, like I said, but Frewer did make the character his own. And to take a little bit of a break from TNG, now we're going to transition to Voyager. Now, Voyager is and likely will always be top one or two shows that I love, because I don't know, is this a special bond with them, with the crew that I've had over the years, and that's the only Star Trek series I'll double rewatch in my personal life. And plus, there's so many great moments in my life have been tied to the Voyager show. Like the night before I got married, I fell asleep to a couple EMH episodes I randomly picked in the bachelor house that I was staying at. Voyager will always have a special place in my heart. Overall, I find that Voyager still has the best and the most enjoyable character development and some of the storylines that are very unique to Star Trek. However, that doesn't mean I like everything. And one of the storylines I find really less appealing in Voyager is in Season 4 with the introduction of this holographic Leonardo da Vinci. And Da Vinci made his debut in Star Trek Voyager in Season 3 in the episode Scorpion Part 1. and the character and his workshop went on to have a minor recurring presence throughout season 4. Da Vinci was created by Janeway as one of her recreational, quote-unquote, recreational holodeck programs. It, to me, provided an interesting diversion for the characters and provided change of scenery. However, despite this, the character and the actor who played him just were never done justice. The actor who played Da Vinci is none other than John Rhys Davies, and he's an incredible actor. Now, if you don't recognize that name, you will recognize his roles. So he has a very distinguished career. Davies has played Sala in Indiana Jones and Gimli in Lord of the Rings trilogy. And like I said, I've been a fan of him for years, which is what baffles me, is that Voyager's writing team, creative team, whatever, selected him for such this minor role and ridiculous role as Da Vinci. To be clear, I have no issue with Davis's performance in the role. He was great. He was delightful as always. He brings the character to life wonderfully, all things considered. However, to see Davies so little in that recurring role and playing such a random, absurd part, to me is a complete waste of his range. And I understand probably securing him under contract was a big win for the Voyager team. Maybe they had the hopes of developing his role into something more, but also you have to think at the same time, season 4 is when Jeri Ryan started picking up, and she's introduced into the Voyager cast. So you have Jeri Ryan coming on, a lot of screen time, a lot of plot points being directed toward her character and her character's development. Didn't leave a lot of room for this wonderful actor, and he was left on the cutting room floor, unfortunately. Now, is that confirmed? Did we know that for a fact? Did we hear from the showrunners, from Brega, or anybody? No. We have no idea. However, it's just logic and it's sound. There's only so many minutes and so many episodes a season, and all the resources went to the Doctor in 7 of 9 in season 4. However, never say never. At the time in the 90s when he was cast, he was very excited about the role. He even told the Chicago Tribune that he was looking forward to kind of becoming a recurring character on Star Trek. And as we know, that wasn't meant to be, but Davies hasn't been on Star Trek since 1997. And even with Lower Decks bringing back the holodeck version of Da Vinci, and even matched his design, it matched his appearance, his demeanor, everything, the producers opted to recast the role using somebody called Gary Cole as the voice actor for Da Vinci. Davies was recently speaking to a crowd at MegaCon and said that one of his favorite parts about the Star Trek Voyager experience was watching his crewmates work their magic. And he was like, it was awesome to see their fellow actors and actresses get swept up into the roles, and that he would hope to re-enlist and maybe come into Star Trek again. I would absolutely love that. I think he could do a fantastic job in some type of capacity, maybe in Starfleet Academy, maybe an old grizzled lawn keeper, or I don't know. I think it'd be great because I don't know what the time frame is for Starfleet Academy, what Boothby's doing, but maybe having Davies on the show would just add so much credibility, add so much depth, so much just warmth. So about halfway through here, the top 5 that we're going through, we have, this is probably one of my favorite and just random ones, is seeing Jim O'Heir cameo in Voyager. Now, fans of the NBC sitcom Parks and Rec will fondly remember Jerry Gertrude. And this is this bumbling, kind of accident-prone, he farts and has a heart attack. He's this civil servant who has a heart of gold, but is just wants to put in a hard day's work and go home to his shockingly attractive family. What a lot of people don't realize is that, and a lot of those Parks and Rec and Trek fans may not realize, is that the actor who played Jerry, or Larry, I forget, Jim O'Heir, was also in Star Trek Voyager, and he basically played a more depressing version of his Parks and Rec character in the 24th century. In the season 7 episode Critical Care, O'Heir is seen playing this alien only They did our boy dirty. They did our boy Jerry dirty. They labeled him in the credits as only quote-unquote husband. That's it. Doesn't have a name, nothing. So the synopsis of the episode is that Voyager comes across this character as they look for a thief named Gar who stole the doctor from the ship to sell him. And the husband knew Gar because Gar and his wife were very quote-unquote close. You can see where this is going. So the husband would do whatever Gar asked, even if it meant him helping or doing something that was less than above the law. And why did the husband do this? Well, because his wife asked him to. And it was the same wife who eventually ran off with Gar and left the poor, sad Jerry all alone. Typical Jerry or Larry or whatever. But jokes aside, Critical Care is one of Voyager's absolute best episodes in my opinion, and tackles the idea of inequality in healthcare, that the doctor is basically forced into medical slavery and he's being forced to give precautionary care to more socially vital patients as opposed to helping those patients who are very sick and very poor patients, people that couldn't really, quote unquote, give too much to society. So he has to give medicine to the more worthy patients versus more, quote unquote, unworthy patients. It's a brilliant episode, brilliant commentary on the healthcare system, like I said. And Robert Picardo does awesome. And this subplot of them trying to find Gar, and this is where we see Jim O'Hare come in, is very lighthearted. And I think you needed something where it's more lighthearted and almost innocent between Janeway and Jim O'Hare, is because it was a very intense, heavy episode commenting on very complex issues. He was the delight of the episode, but for any Parks and Rec fans, if you're randomly watching Star Trek Voyager in the 7th season, you'll be like, oh my God, it's Jerry. And yeah, so it's, again, one of the more fun, delightful parts of Voyager, of course. So moving on from Voyager, which we've been at a couple times so far tonight, we are going into the great Deep Space Nine and talking about Jonathan Banks' cameo, one-time cameo in Deep Space Nine. So years before Breaking Bad became a TV sensation, the actor behind one of his most beloved characters kind of went toe-to-toe with our great Captain Benjamin Sisko. And it's, some people would call it a forgotten episode, like it's a random episode that you really wouldn't think of in the first season. But to me, it really sets the tune of allowing Kai Wynn to come in. You have to have this episode first. In Season 1, Episode 13, called Battle Lines, Commander Sisko and an away team are thrown into this never-ending war on this nightmarish planet where, get this, it's impossible to die. So you're at war, and it's impossible to die. Why wouldn't you just freaking rectify peace at that point? Because you're just going to have to keep... Never mind. Watch the episode. They figure it out. It's good. We are introduced to the Enos faction. Sisko meets their leader, Golan Shila, who is played by Breaking Bad's Jonathan Banks. And Golan is convinced by Sisko to kind of negotiate a ceasefire with their rival faction, the Null Anise. And tragically, this peace accord could not be made, and this never-ending war continued despite both parties realizing how futile and depressing it is to fight a war that's never going to be won and you're constantly going to die. Which sets up that this is a classic Star Trek analogy and allegory for all the futility and horror of war that we always see. Also, Jonathan Banks' performance adds a lot of grit, and just overall tone of the episode is shifted when he arrives on screen. So if you haven't watched this episode, I highly recommend it. And when I say is a one-time cameo, a lot of times people will say, oh, this is before they were famous, kind of a gig for Jonathan Banks here, but it's actually not true. Jonathan Banks has been an actor since the 1970s, and he was on a show called Wise Guy, and it was 74 episodes as this crime detective person. I don't know. I couldn't get a lot of information on it because who's really writing deep op-eds about 1970s crime shows. However, he was in a couple other 80s movies, which are great. One highlight being and this is a real movie from the 1980s called The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Across the Eighth Dimension. Yep, probably a highlight in that dude's career, for sure. But he became internationally famous with his role in Breaking Bad. But it's nice to see that grittiness first in the 90s on this DS9 episode. And for those of you that don't know, there are a lot of Breaking Bad connections with Star Trek. John DeLance had a memorable role in Breaking Bad, and it was, I'm not going to ruin it, but he was in the show for a couple seasons. As well, there is the actor who plays Hector Salamanca, or his real name is Mark Margolis, and he appeared in a couple episodes in TNG in season 3 of that show. So there's some little pop-ins from there, most notably John DeLance with Q and a prominent role in Breaking Bad. But again, if you haven't watched DS9, you would have never known that, Banks was a Trekkie. And for our last one of the day, we're going back to Voyager. You see what I'm saying? That's why I like Voyager so much. There's so much random cameos in it. And plus, the first episode, part 1 of these fun unknown Hollywood cameos, there were a lot more TNG or DS9. And if you don't know the band Rage Against the Machine, they're a very famous band. They are probably one of the most leading kind of rock punk bands in the 90s, 2000s. And their guitarist, Tom Morello, is an absolute massive Star Trek fan. Believe it or not. And he actually has 2 Star Trek cameos under his belt. So if you're a Trekkie, that is like the holy freaking grail. To actually be able to be on Star Trek as a character. Not only was he a character in a movie and on Voyager, he got a speaking part in Voyager, which we'll cover. But first, like I said, he was on a movie in 1998. He actually contacted Star Trek producer Rick Berman and asked to have a cameo in Insurrection. Berman agreed because his son was such a big fan of Rage Against the Machine, and Morello in an interview was talking about how that he didn't care that he had to be in makeup for 4 or 5 hours, and basically they were working in a desert, so it was absolutely miserable because he says it was worth it because I got to meet and talk to Jean-Luc Picard, aka Sir Patrick Stewart. So I would make that deal. Would you make that deal? I'd make that deal. 100% make that deal. Stand in, be in makeup, be unrecognizable so nobody knows it's you in a movie, but you get to talk to Sir Patrick Stewart. Yeah, that's easy. Next question. Since Berman and again his son was such a big fan, they actually asked Morello to come back for an episode of Voyager, but this time as a human Starfleet officer with no makeup. And after the episode was shot, which is a good shepherd, which we'll get a synopsis about, and Morello's role exactly, he was praised by Rick Berman, who said he did a great job, and he's a pick-me-up for everyone on the crew and cast that day. Like I mentioned just a couple seconds before, The Good Shepherd, this is the 20th episode of Season 6, and it is when Catherine Janeway finds out from this efficiency report from 7 of 9 that there are literally 3 crew members who are not contributing as much. They are lost sheep, and so Catherine Janeway is going to be a good shepherd and try to get the most out of them, put them on away teams, etc. And she goes down to kind of like the quote-unquote lower decks, the very bottom of the ship, to find these lost sheep, I guess you could say. And basically Tom's there, kind of give her directions and be like, oh, his office is there? Nope. Not left, right? Yep, there you go. That's it. That's all he says. Couple lines of dialogue with Janeway, but it's awesome. So he actually, in this interview with, is it Metalhead? Is that what it is, Luna? Luna the intern, everybody? Yeah, and so with this interview with Metalhead, I don't know if that's a real magazine or not, he even said he didn't grow up a Trekkie, but he discovered it while living unemployed in Hollywood in the mid-'80s, so he definitely lost up for a lot of lost time and then some. I mean, he lived the Holy Grail. Hats off to crewman Mitchell there. That is our wrap-up of this episode on the top 5 cameos from everything from a holodeck to Hollywood and in between. It's been great. These last kind of 2-part series has been a lot of fun. Maybe I'll revisit it again, but I mean, there's literally just dozens and dozens. The lady who did Bobby Hill's voice on King of a Hill. She was in Star Trek a couple episodes, cameoed it. I mean, that was the kind of the silliest one. It was on the cutting room floor. And I was like, I got to keep in Tom Morello. Can't put in Bobby Hill over that. Either way, thank you all so much for listening. It's been a pleasure to be back speaking with you. And Luna, let's roll. Thank you all so much for listening, and it is so good to be back. I've missed it, sitting behind the golden OPP microphone here. And again, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to. We're pretty much on every platform, whatever platform you're listening on to now. So thank you for tuning in. And like I mentioned before, we're going to have exciting stuff coming out this fall. But please remember to reach out. We're on Instagram. I think we're close to 80,000 on Instagram. So please feel to reach out, talk about episodes, talk about Trek. I love interacting with you guys. It's my favorite part of the podcast. As always, remember to take care of your mental health. Keep those crowns on, kings and queens. We want you here. You're valuable. And second star to the right. Straight on till morning.